On this Sunday night, the struggle to get out of Sudan. Canadian diplomats evacuated as fighting rages. But what about Canadian citizens who have been told they're on their own? Also tonight, 5 years later, painful memories live on.
The violence and loss of life will remain a scar on many of our hearts.
Looking back at one of Canada's worst mass murders. Toxic time bomb, the deadly discovery in Alberta's oil sands.
It's not a matter of if, but when the Chinese military will try and move on Taiwan.
We're one-on-one with Taiwan's Foreign Affairs Minister, talking China and foreign interference. Plus, sharing everyday experiences.
Obviously, there's not many of us, at least in chemical engineering.
The special space giving back to Black students.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin with the power struggle in Sudan and the scramble to get Canadians out. Today, Ottawa temporarily suspended all operations in Sudan as the situation in the capital grows more desperate by the day. Deadly clashes between Sudan's armed forces and a paramilitary group shows no sign of letting up. Airports are under siege, and there's no obvious escape route. But tonight we're learning new details of a successful operation that did get Canadian diplomats out of Sudan. In a tweet, Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly says Canadian diplomats are safe and they're working from a location outside of the country. Now, where exactly embassy staff are is not yet known, but nearly 1,600 Canadians stuck in Sudan have been told to shelter in place because getting them out is almost impossible. Mike Drolet has our top story tonight.
The distinctive rattle of gunfire echoed throughout the Sudanese capital of Khartoum again today, as some locals ventured out to scavenge for whatever food and supplies they could find. The increasingly violent power struggle between two Sudanese generals that began just over a week ago shows no sign of abating. Expats living in Khartoum describe it as chaos.
Everyone has been stranded. There is no hope of survival. Everyone is just running helter-skelter, looking for shelter to survive.
Saudi Arabia was able to evacuate more than 150 of its citizens by ship on Saturday, one of only a handful of countries that were successful. The U.S. and U.K. militaries evacuated diplomatic staff from their embassies. It's unclear how, but Canadian diplomats have also left the country. That leaves roughly 1,600 Canadians still in Sudan. Late last night, they received a communiqué from Global Affairs Canada, offering that the situation is volatile and that foreigners and staff of international organizations have been targeted. The recommendation is that Canadians shelter in place because no air evacuations are possible at this time. And a stark reminder that no help is coming. Keep in mind that you are responsible for your own safety and that of your family. The fighting was right outside Vesna Vukovic's apartment. The Canadian teacher had very little power or data left on her phone today. She told Global News she was on a cramped bus headed to the Egyptian border. It's definitely going to be a long and dangerous journey, she said, but at least we clearly understood the message of our government, knowing that we are on our own. She added, "This is our only chance." She has a potentially harrowing journey ahead as the fog of war continues to hang over Khartoum. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
The Public Service Alliance of Canada is ramping up its picketing, targeting locations such as ports starting tomorrow. More than 100,000 members of the union walked off the job last Wednesday after contract talks broke down. The union president says they will be moving picket lines beyond office buildings to have more impact on government services. To Alberta now, where energy company Suncor says it's discovered dozens of dead wildlife at one of its sites north of Fort McMurray. Tailings ponds hold toxic wastewater left over from the production of bitumen. Tonight, Heather Yourex-West on the calls for change.
Addressing the tailings challenge is important to us as a company and to our stakeholders.
For companies in the oil sands, the problem of tailings ponds has proven to be a difficult nut to crack. The pools of wastewater now cover large areas of the boreal forest. And on Saturday, Alberta's energy regulator reported that at one of Suncor's tailing sites, a number of animals had been discovered dead. Originally, the regulator said the company found 32 birds at the tailing site 28 kilometers north of Fort McMurray. But after further investigation, the company updated the total to 43 birds, 2 muskrats, 1 bat and 1 vole.
It wasn't a surprise because deadly bird landings on tailings ponds have been happening. They've actually been reported for decades.
1,600 ducks died when they landed on a tailings pond operated by Syncrude in 2008, and 31 great blue herons were killed at a Syncrude oil sands mine site in 2015. More recently, 50 birds were killed after landing on a site operated by Imperial Oil in 2020. Oil sands are required to have bird protection plans in place for their operations, and in a statement, Suncor says its bird deterrents, including cannons and radar, were active. Both Suncor and the AER are investigating what went wrong. The incident comes in the same week that Suncor reported a release of 6 million litres from a sedimentation pond, and just days after the CEO of Imperial Oil apologized before a parliamentary committee for a series of leaks at its site at Curl Lake.
We are disappointed in this recent performance. We can and will do better. I promise you that.
But the reality is the problem of tailings ponds has no solution yet. The wastewater covers an area the size of a small city with no viable way to clean it up.
And that cleanup question is one that Canada hasn't solved, and we really got to start this conversation now.
Because without that conversation, there's growing concern more leaks, spills, and wildlife deaths could be ahead. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
On a sunny spring day 5 years ago, a man deliberately drove a van down a busy sidewalk in Toronto, committing one of the country's worst mass murders.
It was unfathomable then and still shocking now to think how our innocence as a community and as a city was lost. The violence and loss of life will remain a scar on many of our hearts, especially those who...
Today, family and friends gathered in Toronto to reflect on the tragedy and to honor the people who died in the attack in April of 2018. 16 others were injured, including a woman who died from her injuries more than 3 years later. To Quebec now, where the provincial government is backtracking on a major campaign promise. Premier François Legault made a pledge to build a highway tunnel under the St. Lawrence River to connect Quebec City to Lévis. But as Mike Armstrong explains, that project is now being scaled back.
Alors bonjour à tous et bienvenue à ce point de presse. Quebec's premier didn't do any favors for his transportation minister, sending her out Thursday alone to kill a campaign promise.
With this data, there is not a necessity of having a new bridge for cars.
Now, the project was announced in 2021 by the Premier, along with a video outlining the plan. It would have been 2 levels and 6 lanes linking Quebec City with Lévis. Right now, there are 2 bridges, but they're side by side and both at the western end of the 2 cities. The car tunnel would have been at the eastern end. The transportation minister says post-pandemic, traffic has dropped to the point the project isn't needed. Instead, it's being scaled back and will only involve public transit.
This is the right decision to make.
Now, that doesn't mean it's an easy decision to make. In last fall's provincial election, the tunnel was a major issue for the region, and some candidates who promised it are coming under fire. Cabinet Minister Éric Kerr promised to fight for the project, quote, until his last drop of blood.
Je peux comprendre que les gens se sentent trahis.
He now says he understands if people feel betrayed.
Je vous le dis.
The education minister choked back tears talking about the turnaround. The tunnel would have connected his riding to Quebec City. He asked journalists to go easy on him.
Please don't let me talk about it some more. It's a little too much.
Quebec's premier has made a calculation that the next election is far enough away that voters will forget. Observers say he may be right, but that might not be his only challenge.
The main problem for the CQ is not with voters, it's about internal party unity, especially within the caucus.
Qu'en est-il de la notion de respect?
The change of heart has been fodder for opposition parties. Each of the other 3 parties in the National Assembly campaigned against a tunnel for cars.
The Coalition Avenir Québec made a choice to lie to Quebecers.
Now, the original plan didn't have the support of the federal government. Ottawa has a policy of not funding new roads. The plan as it stands now, public transit only, would qualify for federal funding. The question is whether the support from the public is still there. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Drilling down into dental care. Coming up, the federal government's plan. Dentists fear will leave a giant gap. Universal dental care was a big-ticket item in this year's federal budget, with industry professionals welcoming investments to help Canadians access care. But as Catherine Ward reports, some caution there are other barriers to access, including a shortage of dental assistants.
It was a key part of the 2023 federal budget.
I am so proud to announce the creation of a new Canadian dental care plan.
However, advocates say even with the investment, the industry is in a tough spot.
The shortage of dental assisting is the #1 issue for dentists across the country. We are hearing that over the next decade, there are going to be declining numbers of dental hygienists as well. But right now, the immediate concern is the shortage of dental assistants.
In 2019, before the pandemic, just over a third of dental offices had unfilled dental assistant positions. From 2010 to 2020, the rate of dental assistants entering the workforce declined from 3 for every dentist to just 1.
Dental assistants perform a variety of tasks. Their job can include greeting patients and clerical work, but more often the role works alongside the dentist during procedures, as well as sterilizing, managing tools and materials.
They're mixing those materials, they're handing them to us. Sometimes they're doing part of the hands-on work themselves. So we do rely on them a great deal.
Kelly Mansfield has been a certified dental assistant for 30 years. She says part of the reason many leave, including herself, is because of poor compensation and benefits.
I was a certified level 2 dental assistant for over 10 years and worked in private practice. And I left because I just couldn't live on the salary of a dental assistant. So I did take my oral health education and background, and I went into a different profession.
Another issue the association is concerned about is untrained people filling the roles.
The biggest risk would be that dentists are hiring untrained individuals that are being hired to fill the role in the operatory. This is a significant concern to dental assistants and a significant concern to the general public.
Some hope the federal investment will help fill the gap.
There is a section of the budget that talks about an oral healthcare access fund, and we hope that that's an area where we can get some support to increase the number of programs to train dental assistants.
In the meantime, with more people now able to see the dentist, getting into the office might require some wait. Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, Taiwan's timeline. We sit down with the country's foreign minister, talking when, not if, China will attack. With its latest military exercises wrapped up, China's recent show of strength around Taiwan has ended. But that hasn't cooled tensions. A delegation of Canadian MPs also visited Taiwan earlier this month, meeting with its president and other top officials. And during that visit, our Jeff Semple sat down with Taiwan's foreign affairs minister, discussing the threat of a potential Chinese invasion and foreign interference.
Several things we can say about the Chinese military threat against Taiwan. The first is China used the pretext of President's meeting with Speaker McCarthy of the U.S. Congress. But the President has been visiting our diplomatic allies all the time. So this time around, there's no exception at all. And China used that as a pretext to launch major military exercises against Taiwan. It's unacceptable, totally unacceptable. What China wants to do to Taiwan is to eliminate Taiwan's international support. But if you look at Taiwan, Taiwan is a democracy. We have rights to make friends, and we want to make friends the way we want to make.
One of the areas of focus for the Canadian delegation is the discussion about foreign interference and Taiwan's experience with that. We've seen in recent weeks reports and revelations in Canada alleging that the Chinese government tried to interfere in recent Canadian elections. What did you make when you heard about those reports?
When we saw the news of those reports that China was trying to interfere in the Canadian politics or elections, we feel that Canada is not alone. There are other countries, many other countries that China is trying to interfere in their politics through disinformation campaign or through diaspora groups and etc. And the Taiwanese people are saying that, well, we have experienced all that and a lot more, and for many years already. And therefore, we have developed some understanding of the Chinese interference. And if there's any country who want to learn from Taiwan, the way we have gone through all these kinds of problems and the way we have learned our experiences, we welcome those kinds of requests for exchanges. And the Canadian delegation this time around has been raising that issue. And Taiwan is a vibrant democracy, especially represented by very active NGOs. And there are some NGOs who are very active and very positive on this matter. They try to crack the Chinese disinformation campaign, and they try to work with media, they try to work with the Taiwanese government, and they have become internationally renowned in dealing with disinformation.
A lot of intelligence officials and academic experts, the refrain you hear a lot is that it's not a matter of if but when the Chinese military will try and move on Taiwan. What do you think?
I think I would agree with some of the analysis. It might be 2025, 2027, or 2035, and etc. There's some merits to those analyses, but from our perspective, we should not wait for those years to come. We should be prepared, and we're trying to get prepared. Whenever an authoritarian state has a problem domestically, like economic slowdown, domestic discontent, they may find a scapegoat outside the country to create the crisis in order to divert the domestic attention or to keep the country together. And for Taiwan, we are so conveniently located right next to China, and we are concerned to be China's scapegoat. Their ambition and their expansionism has been noticed by many countries like the United States, Canada, Japan, Australia, and etc. Their ambition is over all Pacific. Their ambition is over Indian Ocean as well. So these kinds of highly provocative and expansionist type of behavior should be met with opposition. And under these kinds of circumstances, when the authoritarianism is continuing to expand, if we flash back to the Second World War and look at the origin of the Second World War, is one country, one man pointed to one territory and said, that is mine, and that is mine, and they go grab it. It is the same situation in this part of the world. Somebody is saying that Taiwan Strait is mine, Taiwan is mine, East China Sea is mine, and South China Sea is mine, and they want to go grab it. This is very dangerous, and we should stop them from doing this.
Minister, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for seeing us.
And appreciate it very much for being interested in speaking with me.
A special space for Black students next. How one room is making great strides for inclusivity at Toronto Metropolitan University. Like so many institutions these days, the university in the heart of Canada's biggest city is a place in transition. Toronto Metropolitan University is taking steps to tackle its racist history and imagine a future beyond its former namesake. The university was originally named Ryerson after Egerton Ryerson, considered an architect of Canada's residential school system. For years, the school faced calls to reevaluate its heritage, and a task force was formed in 2020. And then it all came to a head in 2021, during Canada's racial reckoning over unmarked graves discovered at a former BC residential school that sparked protests, and activists toppled Ryerson's statue on campus. The statue was never restored, and the university changed its name months later as part of the task force recommendations. Now TMU is seeking to be a more inclusive space that pioneers change. And that can take shape in many forms, even if it simply means just having a safe place to hang out. This is the stressful season for students at Toronto Metropolitan University. But there's something new this year, intended to better support one of the school's historically underrepresented groups.
Like, the room itself isn't really nothing special, it's just a room. It's mostly just the people, the vibe that is brought into this room that keeps me coming here.
Decompressing, prepping, and sharing the everyday experiences that are unique to them as Black students.
I kind of just look out for other Black students and try and get to know them, because obviously there's not many of us, at least in chemical engineering.
And having conversations that make him feel less alone.
Just being Black, it's always been like a little bit of a pressure to try and outperform like others.
The school's Black Student Lounge was developed out of a recommendation from a 2020 anti-Black racism campus review that found Black students face racism from their peers and the school itself, including exclusionary admission practices and concerns with policing on campus. The lounge is available to Black identifying students and staff who are asked to complete an access form to gain entry.
I was recently talking to a student, and I'll quote them here because I think it's such an important point, that in the Black Student Lounge, they get to just be themselves, and outside of the lounge, they're Black students.
The University of British Columbia is also pioneering a similar program. Its Vancouver campus started the Male Black Initiative last year as a confidential space for Black men to connect.
It's one thing to recruit Black students here, it's another to stay here. And if you don't feel comfortable staying here, if you don't feel like you belong, chances are you may not complete your education.
The schools have heard criticism. The spaces exclude students who aren't Black. Leaders from Toronto Metropolitan say that's not the point.
These universities, part of how we create them is to say we make them for everybody, but the very systems in which these institutions are built, often the dominant classes are predominant. They have more access, and within the actual institutions, they have more voice.
It's a great place to be. I love it here. Yeah, I'm glad it is here because I don't know what I would be doing if it wasn't.
One of the biggest things that I've seen, or one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in students who have come into this space is their confidence to navigate university overall.
Empowering students to not just survive these pressure-filled years, but to thrive.
And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser, and on behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday evening with us here. Tonight's Your Canada is Lake Winnipeg near Gimli, Manitoba. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.